All right, good morning, everyone. One person said good morning back. Good morning, everyone. All right. Welcome to the next in the Partnership for Strong Communities 2025 IForum series, where we will dig in together on fair rent commissions. My name is Chelsea Ross, and I serve as the Executive Director at the Partnership, and I'm so pleased to have you all in person today. And I'm really pleased to be looking at that water. It's very gorgeous, so please enjoy it. The most requested thing this morning so far has been the Wi-Fi password. So I'm going to give it to all of you right now, okay? So the Wi-Fi password is capital C, lowercase o, capital N, capital H, capital P, lowercase u, lowercase b, lowercase l, lowercase I, lowercase c. So co-NH public. I feel like I was calling the lottery numbers. If you didn't get it, ask a friend. Also, the restrooms are going to be right outside to your right if you sort of head back from whence you came. Right, so I want to get us started by saying thank you. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge the team here at the Partnership that put together today's forum. First and foremost, Alicia Gardner, our Senior Policy Analyst, standing up right here. A round of applause for Alicia. Alicia led the development of today's forum, all of the logistics, and so a big thank you to Alicia. And thank you to the entire team here at the Partnership and the team at the New Haven Fair Rent Commission who have made today and the Fair Rent Commission network meeting that is going to happen afterwards possible. I'd also like to take a minute and thank all of the elected officials and their staff who have joined us here today. Thank you so much. We know how busy you are, and we really appreciate you taking the time to talk about this really important topic. And thank you to each of you for being here. I've heard some parking woes on the way in. I hear you. But the ocean, right? Come on. So thank you. Thank you to the folks who made a donation. We keep these forums free, but we really appreciate when folks throw us a couple of bucks because we keep all of our educational events free and open to everyone. Okay, so you're going to have several opportunities today to join the conversation in the room and ask questions, but we also invite you to join us on social at hashtag IForum25 across all the platforms. You should also maybe have Wi-Fi agenda, I'm now seeing in my note, or Wi-Fi information on your agenda, so maybe that's there, as well as a QR code that we're going to use in a bit. Our hope is that you have everything you need today to feel comfortable, but if there's anything else you need, please find a Partnership staff person who's around who can help you. Most of us have Here for Housing buttons or Here for Housing shirts, and now some of you have Here for Housing buttons. So there's some new faces in the room, so I'm going to do a brief kind of synopsis of who the Partnership is and the work that we do. So we shape solutions to housing issues in Connecticut through advocacy, research, and convening. We engage in smart policy design and strategic civic and political advocacy to expand housing opportunity. We work to produce valuable, timely materials. Some of those are out in the hall and on the way in. Empower communities and foster a deep understanding of affordable housing challenges and solutions in our state. And we serve as a hub for knowledge and collaboration. We create spaces for shared insights and collective action. We envision a future where everyone in Connecticut has a safe, stable home that's affordable to them in an equitable community of their choice. And we work to impact individuals across the housing stability continuum. As a result of our work, fewer people in Connecticut should experience being unhoused or unstably housed, living in temporary, unaffordable, or unsafe housing conditions. So that means that people need to be able to afford their homes while still meeting their basic needs. We know that we need more homes across our state, and they need to come in all shapes and sizes in all different communities. And people should have real choices about where they live and deserve to be protected from the harms of housing instability, eviction, and homelessness. So it's my great pleasure to start our morning together welcoming Mayor Justin Elicker. As Mayor Elicker comes up, I want to express our deep gratitude to the mayor and the city for allowing us to use this incredible venue. It's hard to imagine a more beautiful setting for the conversations we're going to have. So thank you for making this space available to us. I want to recognize the exemplary work of the New Haven Fair Rent Commission. New Haven has been a statewide leader in showing us what's possible when local government takes a proactive, responsive, and equity-centered approach to tenant protections. So your model has helped guide other municipalities, and we're very grateful for your leadership. So Mayor Elicker is no stranger to that kind of bold, values-driven leadership. He's currently serving his third term as the 51st mayor of New Haven, having first taken office in January 2020. There wasn't anything going on around then, right? And re-elected in 2023 with overwhelming support. During his time in office, he has worked with community members and the Board of Alders to confront systemic challenges and build a city where every resident has the opportunity to thrive. His administration has taken major steps on housing, from setting an ambitious goal to build 10,000 new units by 2034, with at least 30% of them affordable, to achieving the construction of over 1,000 new units last year alone, more than 40% of which are affordable, and moving another 7,000 units through the pipeline. He has made housing quality and safety a top priority, expanding inspections and accountability measures to ensure that all residents can live in safe and dignified homes. Before serving as mayor, Mayor Elicker was a member of the New Haven Board of Alders, executive director of the New Haven Land Trust, a U.S. Foreign Service officer, and an educator from elementary classrooms to university lecture halls. Please join me in welcoming Mayor Elicker.
I'm glad you caught, I don't know if you noticed, that you said a goal of 10,000 new housing units with at least 30, and then you said percent affordable. It would be a real bummer if we only got 30 of the 10,000 to be affordable. About the parking, I'm sorry, but the good news is in a couple of years, this whole stretch will be entirely redesigned. We received, thanks to the advocacy of a lot of our state legislators, $12 million to basically re-envision the Long Wharf corridor here. And so we're actually going to close the road in the middle, so it'll be kind of 2 parking areas on either side, and there's going to be a large children's play area, some sports courts and things like that. We're hoping for some sort of ice cream shop, things like that. So, and there will be more parking. So stay tuned for that, just as an aside, because it came up. I'm so proud to be here today. You were saying that you were grateful that we opened the space to you, but we are very grateful that you chose New Haven to host this event. And I'm particularly proud of my team. Will DeLeese, Lee, Colleen are just incredible. Can we give them a huge round of applause for the work that they do? It's just awesome. Not a day goes by, and I know that there's a lot of people here that have similar interactions, but not a day goes by where I don't have many conversations about housing issues, and that's, you know, it's residents that are struggling to find housing that are homeless. It's residents that have housing and it's not well maintained by their landlords, despite a lot of efforts by them to push their landlords to do more. It's residents that are paying way over 1/3 of their income on housing. And so housing is one of our top priorities in New Haven. And I remember a year ago, we had the first convening of this network, and now there are 35 members of the network. So to think about the progress that we've made in the city of New Haven, and that we are humbled, but really excited that people are looking to us as an example of what we can do. And we've strengthened our ordinances, not just on fair rent, but we've also, thanks to the state legislators who have really advocated to give us more tools to find bad actors, we've strengthened our ordinances around housing code inspections, around residential licensing, around blight. And since we've passed some of these new local ordinances that were supported by the state statutes, we've seen an incredible amount of improvement in landlord behavior, because the reality is, most landlords want to do the right thing and do the right thing, but for those few landlords that often own a lot of properties, we have a lot of problems, and the only thing that's going to work is significant fines and accountability. And so we've seen a ton of progress in this area. It's about accountability, but it's about new housing. We need over 100,000 new units in this state to ensure that we meet the demand that's coming, and New Haven is leading the charge. We have more housing permits issued by far than any other municipality in the state. We brought on, in the past 5 years, we've brought on over 3,000 new units. Around 30% of those are affordable or deeply affordable. We have 7,000 in the pipeline. And so I'm confident that we're going to hit that 10,000 new unit goal in the future. And 25% of the 7,000 in the pipeline are going to be affordable and deeply affordable. We have so much more work to do. And of course, New Haven can't do this alone. And that's a lot of the work that Partnership for Strong Community is doing, not just with supporting fair rent commissions, but the advocacy around the state to ensure that there's more accountability, more ownership over the housing issues. And so we're very thankful for the work that you do to continue to advocate. We're very thankful for everything that you do individually to have those conversations about why housing is so important. And we stand with you every step of the way moving forward to ensure that our state is a place where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. Welcome to New Haven. I know most of you have been here before. Have a great time. Enjoy. If you have time, check out other things in our city, and we'll see you again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor Elicker, for your leadership and for your thoughtful words welcoming us this morning. We're going to get started with our first panel, but before we do, I want to invite all of us to shift gears for a moment and put ourselves in the shoes of someone navigating our housing system under pressure. And many of us have been there ourselves, but I invite you to take out your phone and imagine this. You rent your home. You've just received notice that your rent is increasing by 30%. You're shocked, you're anxious, and you need help. So using your phone, I want you to try to find the Fair Rent Complete form for your town. So just wherever you live, try to find where you would go to submit a Fair Rent Complete form for your town. I'm going to give you about 45 seconds. All right, stop. Now you've got your phone out. Scan this QR code using your camera and respond to a quick poll. I'm going to ask you a couple questions about could you find it? How easy was it? All right, so looks like about 70 people have had a chance to respond. So let's take a look at the results together. If you're still finishing up, go ahead, it'll be added. So about 20% of you doesn't think your town has a fair rent commission. So that means you couldn't find anything. You don't know if your town has one or not. 10% of folks who found out that their town does have a fair rent commission couldn't find a complaint form. 10% found one, but thinks it would be pretty difficult for a tenant to file a complaint. And 60%, which is great, found one and think it would be easy for a tenant to file a complaint. So this gives us a glimpse, some of you had a glimpse, into what many home renters experience when they face an increase in their rent. Confusion, delay, inconsistent access, depending on where they live, depending not on the severity of their situation, right? But dependent on simply where they live. So let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. So across Connecticut, there are 54 municipalities with fair rent commissions. They exist in every council of governments region and towns of every size, from large cities to small rural communities. This map overlays existing fair rent commissions with census data, showing the percentage of families in each town who rent. So darker colors have a higher concentration of residents who rent their home. So a few things are clear when we look at this map. Every town in Connecticut has families who rent, and not every town gives those families equal protection under the law. Since the passage of the landmark legislation in 2022, requiring towns with populations over 25,000 to establish fair rent commissions, we've seen pretty significant momentum. That, combined with powerful community organizing in towns, both large and small, has helped double the number of fair rent commissions in just the past 2 years. That said, only about 1 in every 3 towns has a fair rent commission. So that means more than 75,000 Connecticut families who rent their homes have no legal protection from harsh and unconscionable rent increases, to quote the language of the law. So their rights and their stability are still determined not by their circumstances, but by their zip code. So that's why recent efforts like the provision in House Bill 5002, which was ultimately vetoed, but we have hope that there will be a special session and it will pass, that lowers the population threshold from 25,000 to 15,000 to ensure more renters across more towns can access basic protections are so critical. As we saw from the exercise, simply having a fair rent commission doesn't guarantee that anyone can even find it or use it effectively. In fact, across the state, there's a wide spectrum of how fair rent commissions are implemented. On one end, a town may have passed an ordinance and created a basic web page, technically meeting the requirement, but pretty much little more than that. On the other end of the spectrum, we see what we see in New Haven, towns that are fully activating their commissions, connecting the Fair Rent Commission with other departments like housing and legal and social services, proactively informing residents that the commission exists, and holding regular, accessible, fair hearings. But between these two ends lie a vast middle ground where capacity and transparency and resident access can vary widely. So for example, in about half of towns with fair rent commissions, residents can easily find contact information, which means in half of towns they can't. 1 in 4 commissions don't have a complaint form available online, and actually 10% of fair rent commissions require residents to submit the form in person or by mail, which can be a significant barrier, especially for those with transportation or mobility issues. And only 10 commissions have outreach materials available in both English and Spanish, despite the fact that most renters who need these services are from multilingual communities. And we know that structure really matters. Towns that hold regular standing meetings hear more than 6 times as many cases as those that only meet as needed. Even something as simple as a vacant seat on a commission can slow or stall the access to justice for folks. So this data reminds us that fair rent commissions are not just about checking a box. They serve as a vital tool for promoting housing stability, equity, and safety in our communities. And so that's why we're here today. I'm really excited for you to hear from housing advocates, municipal leaders, commissioners, and residents who are doing the hard and hopeful work of building and strengthening fair rent commissions to better serve their communities. So we're going to start with a grounding presentation from Sarah White of the Connecticut Fair Housing Center, who's going to walk us through Fair Rent Commissions 101. She'll explain what they are, how they work, and help us all get on the same page with the legal foundation, history, and mechanics of Fair Rent Commissions in Connecticut. There's also, out in the materials section, you can scan a QR code to access the Fair Rent Commission Toolkit, which has a host of information. Whether you're brand new to the topic or you've been involved in the creation of a commission, you're going to learn something from Sarah. For our first panel, we're going to hear from some leaders from different Connecticut communities, each of them bringing a unique perspective on what it takes to create, resurrect, or strengthen a commission, whether starting from scratch or making an existing commission more effective and accessible. We'll take a very brief break at 11 and then come back together for our final panel where we'll hear directly from tenants, a commissioner, a landlord, and an attorney, each offering a different perspective of what it's like to participate in a hearing, what's working, and what could be improved. So our hope is that their stories will help us move beyond policy into the lived experience and remind us why getting this right really matters. And we'll end the morning with an exciting milestone, the official launch of the statewide Fair Rent Commission Network. So you'll hear a little bit more about that in a moment. It's going to be a full and inspiring morning. I noticed some people are still standing. Maybe that's your preference, but if it's not, there are seats that you can kind of come fill in. So as we transition to the first panel, you can come sit down. And it's now my pleasure to introduce Sarah White, our first speaker of the day. Sarah, I'm going to read a brief bio for you, which everyone loves. Sarah is a staff attorney at the Connecticut Fair Housing Center, where she focuses on foreclosure prevention, mortgage servicing, and fair lending. She brings over a decade of legal expertise and a deep commitment to housing justice in Connecticut. Before joining the center in 2012, Sarah served as a staff attorney at the Legal Aid Society of Middle Tennessee and the Cumberlands. Please join me in welcoming Sarah to walk us through Fair Rent Commissions 101.
Thank you so much, everyone. My name is Sarah. I'm an attorney at the Connecticut Fair Housing Center, and what we're going to be covering today are the basics of what fair rent commissions are. We're going to talk a little bit about the history, about how we came to have fair rent commissions, which are unique to Connecticut, talk about what they can do, and then walk through a complaint from start to finish. I also just wanted to acknowledge Rafe Podolsky from Connecticut Legal Services, who developed this presentation with me, which we've given all across the state to fair rent commissions. So first, what are fair rent commissions? A fair rent commission, which we're going to call FRCs for short, is a municipal board with the power to limit or modify rent increases and other rental charges so as to prevent them from being so excessive that they're harsh and unconscionable, and resetting them to a fair and equitable rate. Some of that language, the harsh and unconscionable language, is in the state statute going back to 1969, which is why it sounds a little antiquated. But at their core, they have the power to regulate rent upon a tenant complaint. And the decision of a fair rent commission has the force of law. It's not advisory, it has to be followed. Like I said, fair rent commissions are totally unique to Connecticut, and they've been allowed since 1969 to provide what's basically individualized rent stabilization to tenants at the local level. The idea is that they function as the conscience of the community regarding rental charges and increases. And commissioners are just ordinary residents of the town, not experts. A town has discretion under state law to decide the makeup of the FRC, whether it's a combination of landlords and tenants or not specifying, and the complaint process. And FRCs are incredibly important. I think sometimes people have the conception that there's some overall limit on how much a landlord can raise rent, that it has to be illegal to double rent or something like that. But the truth is that there isn't. And most tenants have no practical way to challenge an unfair rent increase unless they live in a town with the Fair Rent Commission. The choice most face is to accept the increase, to move out, or face eviction unless there's an FRC. So the role of fair rent commissions is to review rental charges, which is defined under state law to mean any rent increase, which is how we normally think about fair rent commissions, but also additional fees and the base rent in light of all the circumstances. And that includes the individual circumstances of both the landlord and the tenant. But that's not all fair rent commissions can do. They also serve a really important role to help ensure safe housing conditions and can buttress the work of cities and towns, like we heard about from the mayor, to improve housing code enforcement. That's because they can delay or deny a rent increase or even just reduce the rent if there are unsafe living conditions until they're fixed. And with some of these landlords, some of the larger ones that are neglecting properties, this can be an incredibly powerful incentive to finally fix unsafe conditions. And then fair rent commissions can also help resolve many landlord-tenant disagreements, often without a hearing, because many commissions do engage in conciliation, and sometimes at its core, there's just an issue with both sides needing to talk to each other and work something out. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of fair rent commissions and how we got here. So first, they are a form of rent stabilization, which broadly defined is just any limit on a landlord's ability to raise rent. And rent stabilization is not a single thing. It's a menu of options which can range from a rent freeze, a cap on a rent increase, setting rent overall, even programs like public housing, Section 8 that limit rent to a percentage of a tenant's income, or providing this individualized rent relief based on a complaint, which is what fair rent commissions do. And rent stabilization dates back to antiquity, thousands of years ago, and was enacted locally and nationally in the US in the early 20th century. Here in Connecticut, we've had some form of rent stabilization going back at least 100 years. During World War I, there were municipal fair rent committees that were set up in Connecticut, encouraged by the federal government because of rising prices, and Hartford even imposed a rent freeze for a year. During World War II, there was widespread rent control, which is much more extreme than a fair rent commission, for 80% of rental housing to prevent rent gouging. And there were at least 14 local fair rent committees, which I think are kind of the predecessors to fair rent commissions throughout Connecticut. And then until 1956, Connecticut allowed municipalities to set up rent control boards. That municipal authorization was removed by the legislature, and the Supreme Court determined that municipalities could no longer do that without, permission. There was still a problem, though, recognized with rising rent gouging, unsafe conditions, and Hartford tried to set up a fair rent commission, even though it didn't have many teeth at this point, in consultation with the NAACP because of the conditions tenants were facing, and New Haven and Stamford did as well, but they didn't have much authority, so they weren't terribly effective. It all sort of came to a head in 1969 when the state decided that there needed to be some municipal rent stabilization and came up with the idea of authorizing fair rent commissions that could accept these individual complaints, which is the backbone of what we still have. And I've got some testimony up there from a tenant in Waterbury who was involved in the welfare rights movement. It was really Moms on Welfare who went to the legislature, who pushed for the need to have fair rent commissions because of the unsafe conditions they were facing and the rent gouging from landlords. But on the House floor, I did want to share as well, someone from Greenwich spoke up about how this was not just an urban need, and that even in Greenwich, there were landlords that were not maintaining properties, that were significantly raising rent and pushing people out. So even going back to 1969, the legislature recognized, the state recognized that fair rent commissions really were needed, both in our cities and in our suburbs and smaller towns. But the state law in 1969 just allowed fair rent commissions. It didn't require them. So there were many fair rent commissions started, especially in the cities and in many of the smaller towns and suburbs in the Hartford area. And by the 1980s, there were around 24 fair rent commissions in Connecticut and a coalition of fair rent commissions, which I'm incredibly excited has been revived. But by the time I moved to Connecticut around 2012, most of the fair rent commissions were dormant, which I think for two reasons. One is in the early 2000s, there was a long period where rent just did not go up that much. I'm sure there were exceptions, but overall, rent was fairly flat. And then there was also a period where there was less investment in public services at the municipal level for a whole host of reasons. So many of the fair rent commissions withered. That really changed during the pandemic, though. Rent increased dramatically, 20% on average in just a few years, and many examples of rent doubling or increasing by hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And there was a shift in our housing market as more out-of-state landlords purchased complexes here with the intent to flip them or drastically increase rent. So there was again a problem with rising rent, and our legislature looked to fair rent commissions, expanding them as a solution. And in 2022, Representative Q. Williams from Middletown championed a law that required fair rent commissions in towns of 25,000 or more, which has really led to this renaissance we're seeing in fair rent commissions. The fair rent commissions were set up in 2023. There are now more than 50 fair rent commissions across the state, and those historic fair rent commissions that were still there on the books have been revitalized and are now really doing great. And there have also been fair rent commissions created in smaller towns. We'll hear from someone from East Lyme, but Windham as well, that are not required but have found them helpful. So that's a little bit about the history. So we're going to talk now about how fair rent commissions work in practice. So they provide rent stabilization to tenants who already live in a home. So they're not available to you if you're just looking for a house and think the price is unfair based on a tenant complaint. The tenant has to complain about unfair rent increases, bad conditions, or a reduction in services, basically saying the rent is unfair given the rats or whatever else is happening, and also landlord retaliation. And under state law, fair rent commissions have incredibly broad jurisdiction. Any tenant can complain unless they live in a seasonal rental, which is kind of like an Airbnb type thing. You're there for less than 120 days. It's not your permanent home. Tenants with an oral lease can complain, who are month to month, who own mobile homes and rent the lots, all are covered by fair rent commissions. And the general flow is that the tenant complains. There's usually an attempt by the commission staff to informally conciliate it to see if an agreement can be reached, possibly some investigation, usually sending out housing codes or the health department if there's concerns about conditions, the hearing before the commission, and then the decision. And fair rent commission decisions are very flexible and can include, any combination of no rent increase or a reduced rent increase, so only part of what the landlord is looking for, or even a rent reduction based on conditions. They can delay or phase in a rent increase over time, either the whole rent increase or a part of it, which could give the tenant, more time to prepare, to increase their income, reduce expenses. They can lower or delay a rent increase until repairs are made or other conditions are met. They can order the landlord to cease retaliatory conduct. And of course, they can also agree that the rent increase can go forward. But there is so much flexibility and potential for creativity that fair rent commissions have to fairly address tenant concerns about the rent. So what guides fair rent commission decisions? The state law lists 13 factors that a fair rent commission looks at based on the evidence before it that, as applicable to the complaint. But not all of the factors have to be given equal weight. And in each case, some factors are almost always going to be more significant than others. And they can also consider other factors if they're relevant. And I would say they're mostly a matter of common sense. Again, with this being a law that was drafted in 1969, the factors themselves are a little bit antiquated sounding. So what Rafi and I have done is grouped them to make them more understandable. But it really does basically come down to common sense, which goes back to the idea of fair rent commissions being the conscience of the community, that people who live in a municipality can develop a shared understanding of what is and is not fair. So I'm going to go through the factors. The first one is the size and the history of rent increases. The dollar amount or the percentage of the overall rent. Is this the first rent increase in many years? Have there been a series of smaller increases that make this unfair? All of these are the kinds of things that the Fair Rent Commission can consider. They'll also look at what's included in the rent. Is this a situation where the rent includes, heat and utilities? What amenities does the apartment have? So basically, what is the tenant getting for their money? And then another factor is the condition of the apartment and the complex, including, is it substandard? Is it being maintained? Are there any violations of housing, health, building code, fire code? And has the tenant caused any damage beyond normal wear and tear? The Fair Rent Commission can also look at the landlord's operating costs. So for example, is the rent increase tied to an increase in property taxes, another cost the landlord might have, and to what extent, if any, the rent increase will result in improvements to the property. And then the Fair Rent Commission can also look at the tenant's income and the availability of alternative housing if the tenant would not be able to afford the rent and would have to move. And this really goes back to the idea of Fair Rent Commissions providing rent stabilization and security for tenants because of the many harms that can befall upon someone if they're forced to move from a community. It's not the only factor, but it's one that the Fair Rent Commission can look at in deciding, is this increase or is this rent harsh and unconscionable, and should we reset it to something that's fair? And then finally, they can look at other rents in the neighborhood and in the town, comparable to this one. So is this really out of line with what a similar tenant in place is paying? This one can become a little difficult, of course, because it's hard to figure out what's comparable. There's not like a perfect data set out there, but that's one factor as well. So that's the sort of law and the Fair Rent Commissions are looking at, and then I'm just going to talk about finally what a complaint process looks like. So it has to start with the tenant filing a complaint. And at that point, the landlord and the tenant both get notice and information about the process, and the tenant pays the last agreed upon rent while the complaint is pending. Often the staff, depending on the nature of the complaint, may arrange for a housing code or health code inspection to see what is the condition of the property, are there any violations, are there safety concerns. And then in many commissions, there will be an attempt to conciliate or mediate the complaint. Usually informally, not always, but I am so sorry about that. All right, wow. Yeah. Okay, conciliation. Usually that's going to be informal. So a phone call to both sides and seeing what people want, what people are concerned about. Sometimes what might be going on is your stove has been broken for a year, and a rent increase with a broken stove can feel like, insult to injury. And so sometimes in a situation like that, the tenant just wants the thing fixed and then they'll accept the increase. So seeing if something can be worked out. And with many commissions, there are high rates for agreement in mediation. And then there are sometimes situations where a bunch of tenants from the same building complain, perhaps because they've been organizing, perhaps because they've all gotten a really large increase. And for sake of efficiency, a Fair Rent Commission can consolidate overlapping complaints in the same complex. And some ordinances even permit collective complaints, so tenants can all sort of complain together. And some ordinances also recognize tenant unions and allow them to participate in the process or submit complaints. And then, a lot of this is left up at the local level. There is a lot of local discretion about how this works. The model ordinance that we worked on suggested a hearing be scheduled within 30 days, so there's at least something on the calendar, but that could be delayed, of course, to give time for mediation. Then it goes to the hearing. So it's not a court hearing. It's not as formal as that. It's informal, but needs to be orderly. And the commissioners, again, are just ordinary residents of the town on this commission. They may get information in advance of the hearing, like the complaint or housing inspection reports. It's open to the public. The public can't participate or give public comment. It's not like that, but you can go and see the Fair Rent Commission hearings and also their deliberations. There will be a chair that runs the hearing, explains how it will proceed, and then swears in the parties and witnesses. Interpretation should be provided to anyone who's limited English proficient. And then typically there's town staff or the town attorney on hand to provide guidance during the hearing, but it's run by the chair and by the commission. And something that's great about the Fair Rent Commission is unlike court, it's more geared towards people who are representing themselves. You don't need an attorney to file a complaint. You don't need an attorney to represent you. You can have one if you wish. And a commission can also allow a non-attorney advocate to represent a party as well. And then here's sort of the flow of what a typical hearing would look like. Each side presents their case with the tenant going first. Witnesses would give testimony under oath. The commissioners and the parties can ask questions of parties and of the other witnesses. Then, once all the evidence and testimony has been taken in, the commissioners deliberate, which is in public at the hearing. Usually they'll come to a decision there by a majority vote, and usually will announce their decision orally at the hearing, which can be useful for both sides to know what the outcome is. Then after the hearing, staff write up the decision, get approval from the commission or the chair, and then would send it to both sides. And either party can appeal to court that handles housing cases, but a court is not going to retry the complaint, so you're not going to get a new hearing with the court. It's just determining whether the commission's decision was reasonable and complied with the law. So that is the end of my presentation. We've got about 10 minutes left for questions, though. Yes. I mean, it would be binding essentially as a contract between both sides, which is why it's really important to put everything in writing, make sure that there's a complete understanding of what both sides have agreed to, and get it to sign it. I think different commissions have different practices about what that looks like, but it would be binding as a contract between both sides. Yes. Yes.
And that expires after a year, and then the property owner decides to evict. Is that considered retaliation?
It's always going to depend a little bit on the circumstances. So I'm an attorney, I have to say that. But yes, in many cases, that would be retaliatory if someone prevailed at a fair rent commission and then the landlord, after the year or however long the commission decision was, because they can be flexible, chose not to renew. And there, like I mentioned, commissions do have jurisdiction over retaliation. If there was another rent increase after a year as well, the tenant could go back to the commission.
That connects to the question I was going to ask. I know many of us in this room were very active in fighting for just cause eviction protections, which did not pass or get voted on this year. In the absence of just cause eviction protections, it's all good to say, for a fair rent commission to say to a landlord, you can't retaliate. What power does a commission have to stop a landlord from retaliating?
So that's a great question. I mean, we do have other laws on the books about retaliation, but expanding just cause eviction protection, which would have required landlords to have a valid reason in order to non-renew someone or terminate a month-to-month tenant or evict somebody, would have made it a lot cleaner for everybody. But commissions can order that a landlord cease and desist retaliatory conduct. There would need to be a hearing first, but commissions can and have done that. That could include retaliatory conduct like giving a tenant a notice to quit, prosecuting an eviction. They don't have authority over what the court does, but they can order the landlord to stop. And if the landlord refuses to stop, have the ability to fine the landlord or even go to court to enforce their order. Sure, whoever has the microphone, if you all can just pick.
Thank you, and thank you for this great presentation. I'm bringing a question today from someone who staffs a fair rent commission who wasn't able to make it. Can there be a regulation to limit rent increases for the first 6 to 12 months under a new landlord? Her aim is to provide tenants with a grace period, like a certain percentage cap, to either adapt to the higher costs or to secure an alternative residence.
So, I mean, the legislature can do kind of whatever it wants. So, but I mean, a fair rent commission right now can certainly take a complaint from a tenant who is in place but has gotten a new landlord and has gotten a rent increase. And that's actually a very common scenario that we see when tenants need to come to the Fair Rent Commission and tend to utilize it. And we'll hear in a little bit about East Lyme, which is a story of exactly that. And they ended up creating a Fair Rent Commission. There was a law being considered this year that would have created a presumption that within the first year of new ownership, any increase over 10%, except in some narrow circumstances, would be too much. That did not pass, but that was before the legislature.
Thank you. Good morning. So to the best of my knowledge, the retaliation period is 6 months based on the statute. And so in newer fair rent commissions where my municipality is, what I'm anticipating seeing is the landlord doesn't get the outcome that they're looking for, and the 6 month period expires, and the lease is normally a year. So they've gone beyond the retaliation period, they've accepted the conclusion of the hearing, and then they decide not to renew after the year is concluded. So they've essentially followed the law and gone beyond the retaliation period, but don't want to renew because they'd like to invite new tenants in there for a higher rent. So I'm anticipating seeing stuff like that.
Yeah.
So what's your take on that type of issue?
It does get a little complicated, but it's important to know that there's multiple retaliation laws at play in Connecticut. There's this 6 month automatic protection when people take certain protected activity. There's another law against retaliation, which requires more of a finding of intent. And then also in the Fair Rent Commission statute, Fair Rent Commissions have jurisdiction over retaliation for filing at the Fair Rent Commission, which does not have like a 6-month limitation. So often there is going to be a way for the Fair Rent Commission, if the evidence shows it, to find that conduct like that, non-renewing after the end of the year, right when the order is up, is retaliation. But like we were talking about, with something like just cause, it would be a lot cleaner and easier for everybody to understand. But I'm also happy to talk more like after this about ways to approach retaliation.
I just have a question kind of like that. In this scenario, the landlord, the rent was great. This is a Greenwich. I don't represent Greenwich, but they wanted to rent to their niece, and they wanted to not renew the lease. And in that kind of scenario where the person's like, doesn't want the rent raised, the rent doesn't get raised, and then the year is up, but they literally want their niece to move in. They own the 2-family house. I would think that it's up to the landlord who owns the house. They can now choose to, they can prove that their niece is going to move in. Does that fall under retaliation?
So I think that would be up for the commission to decide, which is why there needs to be a hearing, and both sides could present their arguments, why it is or is not retaliation, then the commission could make a decision if the tenant chose to complain about it.
Hello, thank you for this presentation. It's very valuable. My name is Dom. I'm a student at CT State Gateway, a student worker. I just want to know why this isn't more public knowledge, because personally, I'm facing homelessness in a week and a half, and this is something that's very relevant in my life, and I didn't know about this. Why isn't this more public knowledge?
I think that's the work that we all need to do, and it goes back to that history. I mean, I will say when I moved here, I didn't know anything about Fair Rent Commissions. I was practicing law for many years, housing law. I knew they existed, but I didn't think they were particularly useful. But my thinking around that has really changed, and we've only seen this revival of Fair Rent Commissions in kind of the last few years and are still catching up. But so much of what we need to do, I think, is educating tenants that this is available, that there is somewhere to go, because most folks I talk to who don't know about it, they get a huge rent increase, they move out, or they fall behind on the rent because they can't pay it. So that's work that we can all do, that Fair Rent Commissions can do, that advocates can do, that just members of the community can do to educate the public that this is a resource that exists.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to know if there is something in place to help the landlords for when a tenant is retaliating, so they're starting to destroy the property for when an inspection is going to come for that property when the landlord is trying to raise the rent. So is there something to help a landlord for when a tenant is destroying the unit?
So that's not really the role of a Fair Rent Commission. The Fair Rent Commission is about really tenant complaints about rent and then landlord retaliation. But I mean, landlords do have tools that they can use in those circumstances through the courts.
So if the tenant is complaining about the rent being increased, and now to help to stay in the unit, they're trying to tear up the unit?
Sorry, I didn't understand your question. One of the factors, as I mentioned, was like whether the tenant damaged the property beyond ordinary wear and tear. So that would be a factor if there's a tenant complaint about, a rent increase that the landlord could bring to the hearing and that could be considered by the commission.
Hi, can you hear me? Oh. Is that better? Would this be a fair incident to bring to the commission? It doesn't have to do with an increase in rent, but a fine that the landlord imposed on the tenant claiming there was a breach, or the breach in the lease agreement, but if you can't find what they're talking about in the lease?
So this is an interesting question, because going back to the state law, there's a definition of rental charge, which is rent, but any other fees that are imposed in addition to rent. So potentially yes. I would say the core function of the commission, though, are things that look more like rent, but potentially yes.
Hi. I have a question for our speaker, but I also have sort of an invitation for the group here. There's a lot of different people, I believe also in municipal planning. I'm from the town of Manchester, comprehensive planner, joined by our administrative staff attorney. We have a fair rent commission. We've had it for a number of years. My question is, I'm wondering what other towns have written procedures that they might like to share, and for us to possibly share back, because Manchester is in this process, I think, of just codifying some of our process so that it can be easier to practice and replicate with our commissioners and support our commissioners. So there's lots of good energy in here. I want to know who's in this room. If anybody has things to share, I'd like to share written process.
I would just plug the Fair Rent Commission Network, which is made up of staff of fair rent commissions, commissioners from all over the state, and is that space to share what people are doing, whether they're codifying things, come up with best practices, learn from each other, because it really varies in terms of the formality of commissions and whether they have written procedures or not. Are we done? Okay, I think we're done.
And stay tuned for this afternoon because there'll be more information on that exact question.
All right, we're going to welcome our first panel up to the stage. In addition to Sarah, who you've already met, we're welcoming Wildelise Bermudez as a passionate advocate for cities, has spent the past decade working on policy issues, directly assisting urban populations and trying to improve living conditions. During her professional career, Wildelise has earned positions of public trust serving in government in her direct work in the nonprofit sector. She was elected twice to the Hartford Court of Common Council, and prior to being an elected official, she worked for 2 mayoral administrations. Her career also found her in leadership roles for environmental and healthcare organizations, and she's currently, I don't have your title here. I wanted to make sure. She's currently the executive director of the New Haven Fair Rent Commission. Next, we have Beth. Yes, clap for Wildelise. All right, and right next to Wildelise is Jean Serica, was appointed chair of the Naugatuck Fair Rent Commission in 2023, which consists of 5 commissioners and 2 alternates. She uses her broad experiences in management and IT operations to enhance the commission's effectiveness. She's worked with the commissioners to standardize and improve practices by creating a fair rent handbook, developing a landlord-tenant checklist to help landlords and tenants prepare for hearings, and formulating a policy for handling complaints involving eviction notices. Jean is also dedicated to community service, volunteering as a tutor and a board member for Literacy Volunteers of Greater Waterbury, and she is retired from an extensive career in technology and teaching. Round of applause for Jean. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Beth Sibilia. She's the director of the Center for Housing Opportunity in Eastern Connecticut. Beth is a graduate of the University of Massachusetts and Suffolk University Law School. She was in private practice of law for more than 27 years, all in New London. Beth most recently served as select woman for the town of Waterford, a 2-term member of the Waterford Representative Town Meeting, and served as a member of the town's Board of Finance. Beth acted for 2 terms as the mayor of the city of New London and a 6-term member of the city council, where she chaired the Economic Development Committee for more than 4 years. She was the liaison to the Redevelopment Commission and the Planning and Zoning Commission. Beth also served on the New London Board of Education, acting as its vice president and a former commissioner of the New London Housing Authority. Beth, I'm tired. Yeah, that's a lot. All right, okay. And last but not least, Cynthia. Yes, clap for Beth, thank you. I think we were all just in shock. Whew, and I skipped some for time purposes. Okay. Next is Cynthia Latour, serves as Assistant Corporation Counsel for the Town of West Hartford's Office of Corporation Counsel. In this role, Cynthia provides legal support and guidance to various town departments across a broad range of areas, including municipal law, labor and employment matters, health and building code enforcement, and contracts. She also advises town boards and commissions on compliance with legal requirements for public meetings and hearings, and addresses legal questions arising from matters presented to these bodies. So a round of applause for Cynthia and for our entire panel. And I'll hand it over to you, Sarah.
Is this working? Okay. Cynthia, I'm going to start with you. Can you share how West Hartford's Fair Rent Commission works and the process you took to restart it?
There we go. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. The town of West Hartford has actually had a Fair Rent Commission on the books since 1983. That's when the ordinance was actually enacted. And based on town records, the Fair Rent Commission was fairly active and a very dynamic group up until about 2006 or 2007. That's about the time that the Fair Rent Commission became dormant for whatever reason, whether it be a lack of complaints or more comprehensive and robust services by our social services department. But we were dormant for that time, but still on the books, and you could find us on the judicial branch website then. Fast forward, we're in COVID. The governor has placed a moratorium on evictions, and we actually received a call from an attorney from Connecticut Fair Housing, not Sarah, who reached out to us and said she has a number of clients in West Hartford who are interested in filing fair rent complaints, and they would like to know what the process is. As you can imagine, that was quite a surprise for our town staff because while we were still on the books, we'd done nothing since 2006 or 2007. So it became a question of how do we revitalize the Fair Rent Commission and how do we find a diverse group of people who represent the interest of all of West Hartford to serve on that board. So our mayor actually found a great group of candidates who were appointed to serve on this first revitalized Fair Rent Commission. And we worked out a process where essentially anytime someone files a fair rent complaint in the town of West Hartford, whether it be online or they come into town hall and they fill out the form, two things happen at the same time. A, it's automatically scheduled for a hearing, and B, there's a recommendation made that they work with our fair rent mediator, who also serves as our assistant social services director. And so the hope is that through the mediation process with the assistant social services director, they're able to come to a resolution, but to the extent that they're not, we have a hearing. When the hearing notice is sent out, a list of procedures is also sent out. I heard Manchester asking for who has procedures. West Hartford does. More than happy to share it with you. But it's essentially scheduled for a hearing, and it's similar to the process that Sarah set forth as to what our actual hearings look like.
Jean, what has it been like chairing Naugatuck's Fair Rent Commission, and how did you revitalize it, and what are the tools you use to make it effective?
Thank you. Is it on? Okay. So we are a new Fair Rent Commission. We started in 2023 after the state statute was created, and then the town of Naugatuck created their ordinance in alignment with that statute. One of the things we had to work through was, what does it mean to actually be a Fair Rent Commission? We went through the training, but then we had to work through how do we as a commission operate. So the first thing we did was we created a handbook, and that handbook included information about the statute, but it also included things about how we would operate, what were our roles and responsibilities, what do we do if we have a hearing and there's a snow day, basic protocol things around what is expected from the commission. From there, we then said, well, now we know how we're going to work as a team. How do we engage the public? So the next round of activity was to create the complaint form. So we previewed a lot of the forms that were out there, took things from each of them that seemed pertinent to Naugatuck, and we created those. And those two documents became the founding procedures that we followed. Those are posted on the naugatuck.gov site. And those are referenced when people file a complaint. The other thing that's become part of what we do is a focus on continuous improvement. That's my IT background speaking. Because there are many new things, but consistency is also part of what we need to be able to do, because consistently leads to fairness. So to level that playing field, that everybody has a fair shot and an equitable decision, we focus now on when things come up in a hearing or we encounter something new, We work through how we create a procedure around that, so when it occurs again, we know how to operate. We're not always starting from scratch. So over the course of our existence, we've created a couple of other procedure documents to help us, so when we encounter those again, we now have standing fair on how to address them.
So Beth, can you share the story of how and why East Lyme established its Fair Rent Commission a little less than a year ago, and also explain your role with it, which is, I think, unique to the panelists?
Sure. As the introduction stated, I'm the director of the Center for Housing Opportunity in Eastern Connecticut, which covers New London, Windham, and Tolland counties. It is a program of the Housing Collective, and it has statewide and regional partners. One of our statewide partners being the partnership, who's our host today. Just by happenstance and the nature of Eastern Connecticut, and Connecticut, quite frankly, being very small, on July 7th last year, I received a call from my BFF, who happens to be State Senator Martha Marks, who's the co-chair of the Housing Committee. Martha's here today. Senator Marks is here today. She was at a leadership conference and had received a panic call from residents at Windward Village. Windward Village sits in the seaside village of Niantic, which is part of East Lyme. It's where, if you're familiar with the boardwalk that goes for about 2 miles, you can walk along the Sound. Windward Village is hard up in the middle of the village of Niantic. Many of the residents have been there for multiple decades. What we discovered on July 7th is we met about 30 people in a hallway at Windward Village on the 3rd floor with their walkers and canes and hearing aids, and they didn't understand. Their landlord of many years had sold the building, and they were receiving notices of rent increases upward of 90%. So we had explained to them that they're protected under just cause, because most of them fell into the 2 categories or buckets of protection. But nevertheless, as a lawyer, I said, your opportunity to complain is the court system, which is very difficult when you are 30 years old, let alone 80 years old. So the question became, what else can we, the tenants, do? So we called in our experts at Connecticut Fair Housing, Connecticut Legal Services, an organization, Step Up New London, to talk about what their options were. We described what fair rent commissions were, and that the town of East Lyme wasn't required to have one because it was under 25,000 people. The residents decided that was unacceptable. So they wrote a letter to the legislature and asked for, firstly, the expansion of just cause protection for everyone, and secondly, good, sound housing policies as a general matter. It went to the Housing Committee leadership. It was issued, and again, we received one response, and that again was Senator Marks. So we called a press conference to talk about the lack of responsiveness, both at that time from the town and from the state legislature. And we provided to the town model ordinances, fair rent ordinances, model practices, and trained the tenants on how to advocate for themselves before a Board of Selectmen meeting. So we packed a Board of Selectmen meeting repeatedly. They were out picketing in downtown Niantic. One of the selectmen had come to a meeting and said, it's going to take you about a year to get this established. So the ask was, the rental increases were proposed to go into effect at the end of July 2024. The ask was to adopt a fair rent commission now. Don't wait a year, don't kick it to committee. And they were phenomenal. They were just phenomenal. And they moved the needle. We had one person that we had with us was Judy. And Judy had been working for the town of East Lyme for more than 30 years. And she repeatedly asked then and continues to ask now, why hasn't anyone done something to protect tenants in the state of Connecticut? So the Board of Selectmen held emergency meetings. And, oh, you can see there, Judy is the white-haired lady next to me. She is Rotarian in East Lyme. And Jean and Kristen are a mother and daughter that live, I knew Jean before I took this role. Jean is the mother of 5 who downsized to this apartment after she sold the home that she and her husband raised their children in. And that Nicole, Emma, and Joshua. Joshua is an intern with us, and you can see in the red, that's Janet. Janet is a resident at Windward Village. They came up to testify in support of expansion of just cause protections for everyone. Janet's protected. Not everyone's protected. So she came to stand up for those that aren't. By August 31st of 2024, the Board of Selectmen had adopted an ordinance establishing a fair rent commission in East Lyme. And I told these residents that that was, you heard my background, in the scheme of municipal action, quite frankly, a miracle. So they began holding fair rent commission hearings in December. Two of the residents of Windward Village, Gwen and Alicia, you'll hear from Alicia at the next panel, were seated as commissioners. And because life is so fluid at the age of 80, we did lose 3 of our tenants in the beginning of this year, Rusty, Gwen, and Mr. Bagwell, Mike Bagwell. So we continue to gather as recently as 2 weeks ago to enjoy each other's fellowship and to continue to organize for a better community. So.
Wildelise, so New Haven has had a commission for quite some time, but in your role, what have you done to expand the reach of the Fair Rent Commission, and what tools does your Fair Rent Commission use to address a larger number of complaints?
Hi, I'm so grateful to be here. I'm so grateful that all of you are here today, and I'm especially grateful that my father, Pedro Bermudez, is here because I would not be here without him and his amazing support. So in New Haven, we do have the longest standing Fair Rent Commission in the state of Connecticut. So members of our team, I'm also grateful to all the members of our team. And one of the things that we have done to be able to really spread the word and to get more outreach in the community, and when I first started, mind you, I was a one-woman show. It was just me. We can relate to other municipalities who, for instance, are starting off, and maybe they might not have even a staff person, or if they do have a staff person, it's a part-time staff. But when I first started, it was just me. So I started to think about how can we develop more outreach without necessarily having all the resources. So my immediate thought process was, what about our colleges and getting interns? And so that's how we started this process of getting the word out and tabling, going to events, going to workshops, meeting people where they're at, going to churches and having workshops about what is the Fair Rent Commission, how can we be of a resource to the community, going to libraries, public libraries, going and meeting people at schools, and so on and so forth. And so that's an excellent tool, that's a low-hanging fruit for anybody to be able to really get the word out in the community. So partner with existing organizations that are already doing amazing things and being present in the community, meeting people where they're at. The other thing that we've done in the past couple of years is to be able to update our ordinance. The ordinance for the Fair Rent Commission hadn't been updated in a very long time. And we were able to update it 3 years ago, and we did a new amendment last year as well. And with those amendments, we incorporated language to be able to include the recognition of tenants unions in the City of New Haven Fair Rent Commission process. With that, we also have an expansion in terms of what would be considered as a retaliation, so that if tenants come to, let's say, another agency within the City of New Haven that has to do with housing inspections, they're able to also connect with the Fair Rent Commission directly. There is state law that has that language. However, in the past, it's been, let's just use the word gray area when it comes to tenants understanding that they could also come to us if they're being retaliated against, if they go to a housing inspector for unsafe, unhealthy housing conditions. So those are some things that we have done.
So this is a question for all of you, whoever wants to start first. I think fair rent commissions are often seen as tools for cities, but on this panel we have folks from suburbs, rural and small towns, also cities that have created fair rent commissions. How have fair rent commissions been important for your town or city, and what impact are they having?
Did I get it this time? I did. I think one of the main things, and we've heard it throughout, even in people's questions, is tenant advocacy. It's giving tenants a voice. It's making them feel comfortable coming forward with things that they would have other let slide. By virtue of having fair rent hearings, it kind of has spread the word, right? One tenant files a complaint, and we've had 1 or 2 cases where they bring the entire building with them for the actual hearing. And then it continues to spread the word. It allows tenants to connect with their other tenants and talk about situations that they otherwise wouldn't have talked about. It's also been helpful to our staff to be knowledgeable about fair rent commissions, and it's actually worked that our the West Hartford Bloomfield Health District, which oversees, I guess, our equivalent of the health department, is actually knowledgeable, so they know when they go out to health inspections and they see things, they sometimes let tenants know about what is a fair rent commission and what rights do they have. So I think tenant advocacy has been a big part of it. I also think that our mediator has been a big component in helping tenants, even by virtue of filing the complaint. It gives them an opportunity to speak to their landlord with a objective third party who can, maybe put forth a position that they didn't necessarily feel comfortable putting forth themselves and trying to come to a solution.
So I think the East Lyme conversation, which was featured pretty heavily in statewide and local media, generated a conversation in Eastern Connecticut. I mean, our biggest towns are smaller than some of your suburbs in other parts of the state. So this really was viewed as a city issue, Norwich, New London, Wyndham, Groton, and that it wouldn't affect our communities, right, the smaller suburbs. What we made clear is that the housing market is broken, it's commodified. The buyers in this instance used short-term significant debt to come in and overpay with the intention of slapping lipstick on it and either trying to condoize it or get, in their own terms, young professionals in the building. Our market is broken. So the tools like fair rent commissions, just cause protections are a way to combat that broken system. So that has generated the conversation in the smaller towns. We've heard from Baltic, we've heard from Montville, we've heard stories all over Eastern Connecticut, from bigger towns to much smaller ones.
So I'd say I agree with you. I think it's giving voice, but it's giving voice to the tenant and the landlord. I think we have to be mindful that there are 2 parties involved, and there are many times where we want to think it's the landlord's fault or it's the tenant's fault, but this is a dual relationship, so it gives voice to both the tenant and the landlord. And I think by offering mediation as a first round of resolution, it brings them to the table so they can talk to each other, because if they don't feel like they have that ability, then it becomes very contentious. So knowing that you can come to the table with an independent person helping you to mediate it, I think that's a really important aspect to the whole process. The other piece I think that really helps here is about transparency. So when we have a hearing, and I think you had, Sarah, in your notes, we discuss, the commissioners discuss the hearing facts in front of the tenant and the landlord, so they hear what our thought process is. And I think that transparency leads to a sense of fairness. So when people feel they have a voice, they feel there's an independent arbitrator who is actually going to be transparent with how they get to that decision, I think it encourages the use of the fair rent commissions.
I agree with all that has been already said. And I would like to add that for big cities like New Haven, what we're seeing time and time again in terms of the types of complaints that we're receiving, in bulk, the majority of them are actually from what you would call those who are landlords and have the most property, the mega landlords. And so we also receive other types of cases as well, but for the most part, on average, the majority of cases that we're receiving, and we receive a lot of very heavy volume in New Haven, the majority are those landlords who own a lot of property in New Haven. And so when the tenants and the landlords or their representatives come to us through the Fair Rent Commission process, oftentimes it's the first time that the tenant has the ability to connect with an actual human being regarding what is happening on the ground, regarding to whether it is maybe a proposed excessive rental increase, or it could be unsafe, unhealthy housing conditions. And so we are the conduit to allow for this type of facilitation, this type of conversation, and potentially negotiation to occur. So that's something that we are seeing both in the city of New Haven and as well as in other big cities.
And what advice do you all have for municipalities considering establishing a Fair Rent Commission? Or what did you learn in the process of establishing or expanding yours?
Talking to other people. I think that's the big thing. I think events like this are huge. I think reaching out to other municipalities, finding out what they're doing is essential. Fair Rent Commissions all have to adhere to the same regulations and the same laws, but they're not a monolith, right? The framework for each of us for a Fair Rent Commission is different. So reaching out to other people, talking to networks, finding out what's going on, I think is a huge part of providing guidance to what you think your Fair Rent Commission might want to look like. So I think that's a big part of it, communication, these events.
I just want to give a plug for our housing experts that are always on call for us. Sarah has done 2 trainings in East Lyme, one for the community, one for the commission itself. Rafi, I thought he was here, kept town council on track when it was going off track pretty rapidly. And we had people there to train in terms of advocacy. So without your experts on call, you're kind of sunk. So rely on your community, look around you. I do think that additional peer learning is so incredibly important, especially like in Eastern Connecticut where there aren't very many active Fair Rent Commissions. It feels like a foreign concept. So this type of networking event, peer learning event through the network is really exciting to see how these Fair Rent Commissions can learn from each other.
I would say if your first 2 or 3 hearings are a little rocky, that's okay. It's a learning experience for all of us. For me personally, this was my first time on any kind of commission within the town of Naugatuck. So it's been very interesting. The housing discussion is very interesting. And I think it's really important to have commissioners who are willing to listen because you never know who's going to walk in with a complaint. You know nothing about that person. You know nothing about that landlord except what's on a piece of paper. So I think practicing using 2 ears and 1 mouth, you know, really listening to what's going on, I think is a big part of the learning process.
For those municipalities who are interested in starting a Fair Rent Commission, events like this are a blessing. Beyond that, there's also the statewide Fair Rent Commissions network as an additional resource. In regards to the city of New Haven, because we've had the longest continuously standing Fair Rent Commission, we didn't have to think through about what kind of process or ordinance or letters, but I must say it has been really beneficial to hear from all other municipalities who have Fair Rent Commissions because we actually learn from one another as items develop and laws change.
So we've got about 10 minutes left for some audience questions, which, do you want to? Okay.
We'll share.
So I'm from Farmington, and we've had several hearings that, as we restarted, has gone very well. But we're getting a few complaints from an assisted living facility, which is much different than a regular rental. They're moving in, they're getting meals, it's a elderly complex, and we're really kind of baffled on what's the best way. Has anyone ever experienced that before? Because not only are they paying rent, they're paying for services, meals, and so it's hard to compare apples to apples, even with individual residents. That, not that we've dragged our feet on it, but I'm not sure that we know how to kind of pay forward with this.
I would suggest talking to Rafi, who's standing in the back. Rafi and I are always happy to sort of talk through things with people, and on this one, I think Rafi has been doing some thinking recently about this, so it would be great to talk to.
Thank you. My question is especially for communities that are starting fair rent commissions, I think sometimes it's a question of who should staff or where to place that fair rent commission. I've seen in my region, some municipalities have put it with the land use staff, but I had a great conversation today with Rocky Hill about how it's with their social services staff instead of land use. I could see benefits to each. Can you speak about, if yours is in social services or land use, kind of what you see as a benefit? I wasn't thinking about the ways in which social services can provide that holistic help that's needed, that I think as a planner isn't always directly where my mind goes. I'm thinking about those regulatory processes. So I'd be interested in your thoughts.
So all of the West Hartford's boards and commissions are, I don't want to say managed, but monitored by our town clerk's office. Our social services department handles the mediation for fair rent commissions, and then the Office of Corporation Counsel does all of the administrative back end. So it's kind of situated in 3 departments. I think it's helpful to have social services working with both the tenant and the landlord to address the concerns, to see if there is a way to mediate the process. But the reason that the administrative back end is handled by Corporation Counsel is because we're working on, drafting their bylaws. We put together their procedures. We mail out the notices. We make sure that they're sent certified mail. We put the packets together for the commissioners. But it's essentially monitored and managed by 3 departments. And I think that they each have their own role. But I also recognize that that's specific to West Hartford and might not necessarily work for every single department. But I do think that there is a benefit to having social services absolutely involved with it. I guess my question to you is I would imagine that your zoning board of appeals is handled by, if you have one, is handled by your department?
I work for a COG, so I
Okay.
represent member municipalities, and I've seen for some of my communities that had to create fair rent commissions, it ends up with the land use staff, because you think about, okay, who runs commissions, who's used to this process. And I'm very lucky, that's where my question came from earlier, is one of those staff members who cares a lot, but these planners are staffing planning and zoning, ZBA, inland wetlands, and it's really, I'd say the social service side is sometimes outside of their expertise.
Sure.
And just even thinking about HB 5002 to expand fair rent commissions to COGS, where we're not social service agencies, like there's big question marks you've all started.
Yeah.
So those planners who are trying to learn but have their own many regulatory processes they're following, just questioning if that's really the right place or something we should be suggesting a change to. Because some of these communities, it's wonderful, West Hartford has the ability to triangulate,
sure.
but in small communities where you don't even
Yep,
have a planner.
absolutely,
Or,
yep.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to the question. If there's an opportunity to work with the social services department, absolutely. If this is something that your town clerk can help put together things for the Fair Rent Commission, that's also an option as well. I don't think there's necessarily one right or wrong department that should, I guess, be charged with Fair Rent Commissions.
Hi, my name is Alexander Kolkatranis. I work for the Naugatuck Valley Project. As someone who's had a set of experiences around dealing with a landlord that was very retaliatory. I am wondering, in terms of the powers of the Fair Rent Commission, short of just cause and the cease and desist powers that Fair Rent Commissions have, or cease and desist that they can issue around retaliatory action, is there something else in between? Is there something that, are there powers or even gray areas in which Fair Rent Commissions can go further around retaliatory action that, again, I know we don't have just cause eviction protections, but what is in that area, or is that the extent to which Fair Rent Commissions can respond to retaliatory action?
Hello, Alexander Kalakatronis. It's good to see you again. So as you're familiar, the powers that the Fair Rent Commission has are the cease and desist at this moment in time.
Sarah, earlier you said something about consolidating complaints. I'm with the city of Waterbury, and like Will DeLeese, I'm a single person that does the Fair Rent Commission. And I'm noticing that there is one big group that I'm getting all the complaints for. What does that look like when you consolidate the complaint?
I will just briefly start, but then pass it off maybe to Beth and Wildelise, because you all have both dealt with this, right? I would say it can look a lot of different ways. It could be that the complaint itself is just one complaint signed by multiple tenants about sort of common issues with their own sort of individual spin on things. Or they could be consolidated for a hearing, which is what I see most often. And the scenario there is like, usually it's a larger corporate landlord that has given everyone rent increases, and it's just more efficient to have a single hearing, with 9, 10 tenants or however many it is. There was going to be some portions that are individualized. The orders will still need to be individualized to the tenants, but so you're not hearing the same thing 10 times over from the landlord.
Yeah, for the city of New Haven, we have received complaints, for instance, from tenants who belong to in the same building. They all live in the same building, but they're individual complaints that come through. And so sometimes there are particularities within each unit. So maybe what's happening in regards to unsafe, unhealthy housing conditions in one unit, even though it's in the same building, will be different from another unit that's adjacent to it.
I would say it's probably a case by case. We had one situation where there were 2 tenants in 2 different apartments in the same building, but because the criteria of each one was so different, we actually treated them as 2 individual cases versus a single case. So sometimes it's a matter of looking at, are there more things that are similar than not, and whether you should hear them separately or not.
In East Lyme, the first Fair Rent Commission complaints were all from tenants out of Windward Village. They did consolidate for hearing purposes so that the Landlords Council only had to present its books once, say, rather than for the first 6 cases. The individual particularities of a unit or a tenant's tenure there, or what their history of rent increases were previously, were all determined on a case-by-case basis, and decisions were issued on a case-by-case basis, which I believe the statute requires, rather than a collective decision.
Any other questions?
There was discussion in the last legislative session about regionalizing or allowing for that or encouraging it. Obviously, town by town is not always the most effective way of doing things, but I'm curious to hear if anyone here has like any input as far as whether that would be an effective model, particularly like in Eastern Connecticut when we talked about small towns and volunteer work like overload. So I'm just curious if there's any thoughts on a regional system and how that would work and any shortfalls or benefits to that.
We have had discussions in Eastern Connecticut with a smaller city, with adjacent smaller towns. Initial discussion with CCM with a follow-up to cost afterwards. We wanted to get through the legislative session to have that conversation continue. And hopefully the new housing bill that will come out in special session will include the prior provisions for regional fair rent commissions. I think it's a terrific idea. My concern is that the COGS, as you know, not be overloaded without additional resources to help them meet that challenge.
All right, can we give this panel a round of applause? Thank you so much. So a couple of quick announcements. Michael Castro, if you can meet a staff member over by the partnership logos. We'll have our next panel come join us on the stage, and that means you get a 5-minute break, but it's like a hard 5-minute break. We're gonna be tushies in the seat and cruising in 5 minutes, so thank you so much.
All right, and now before we jump right into our panel, I just wanted to make a couple of announcements. So many of you have been asking questions saying, how do I do this? How do I do that? What can I do for my Fair Rent Commission? And I'm happy to inform you that our speaker, Sarah White, has been very generous and allowed us to share her email out. So for those of you who would like to contact Sarah and learn more about your thorny questions for the Fair Rent Commission, those of you who are interested in participating in the Fair Rent Commission Network, which is a place where you can meet and have these conversations in kind of a round table style with other people in similar situations. We will be sharing out this contact information as a follow-up after our event. There are also QR codes and emails listed on some of the tables out front that say, if you're interested in learning more, if you have questions, we have their emails listed there. So you'll be able to reach out and get some of those questions answered if you didn't get a chance to during the Q&A portion. And then before we introduce this panel, I wanted to acknowledge that I noticed some familiar faces while we were looking at the pictures of the East Lyme advocates. And I just want to acknowledge those that were part of their advocacy effort for the Fair Rent Commission in East Lyme. If you're willing to stand, I'd like to offer them a round of applause for their commitment to their community. Thank you so much for what you're doing for Fair Rent Commissions. All right, and thank you again. Welcome to our panel. Real people, real stories from Fair Rent Commissions. This is a topic near and dear to our hearts here at the partnership, is we don't believe that we should just talk about policies in abstract. It's very important that those with lived experience going before a committee or participating in a commission are able to tell their stories about how they've experienced the Fair Rent Commission process. So we're very grateful to hear from them today. My name is Alicia Gardner. I am Senior Policy Analyst here at the Partnership, and I'll be moderating today. We would like to welcome Hope Vaughn, who is here as a tenant and a representative of the Tenants Union to tell her story with the Fair Rent Commission. Alicia Chandler, who is here as a tenant commissioner, who also participated in the advocacy around the East Lyme Commission to tell her story. John Souza, who is both a landlord and a landlord commissioner on the West Hartford Commission, to bring his perspective as someone on generally the other side of the Fair Rent Commission complaints and how he sits in on those commissions and makes his rulings. We'd like to invite Peter Cunningham, who is here as a citizen commissioner from Hamden. And just to take a step back, not all Fair Rent Commissions, but many have rules about what percentage of commissioners should be tenants, what percent should be landlords, and what percent should just be citizens or residents. So we've tried to gather people from all perspectives on the commission as part of this panel. And
And then last, we'd like to introduce Sarah Mervine, who is here representing the Yale New Haven Health Medical Legal Partnership and also the Center for Children's Advocacy, where she's director and also an attorney who has represented clients before fair rent commissions. So we're bringing that perspective in as well. So let's give a round of applause to our panel. Thank you so much for joining. So we're going to kick off with Hope. Like I said, Hope is a New Haven resident, a leader of the Quinnipiac Avenue Tenants Union. Hope has worked extremely hard to maintain stable housing not only for herself, but for her community, and we're so grateful to have her with us. Hope, could you please tell us your story of the Fair Rent Commission hearing that you've gone through?
Okay. Can you hear me now? It's a pleasure to be here today. My experience with the Fair Rent Commission was due to a rent increase. I had lived in my apartment for a year when I received a rent increase of $200. So from the time I signed a lease to the end of the lease for that year, it increased $200. I felt that was astronomical. Not just because of the amount, but also because of the condition of the unit. The unit, it had some unsafe, unhealthy housing conditions, and I was already involved with the Connecticut Tenants Union, so I called the president, Hannah and Luke. You guys have probably heard their names. And they told me I should call the Fair Rent Commission, Wildelise Bermudez, who was just here. I called her. I let her know that I thought my increase was unfair. And she asked me if there were any issues in the unit. So I went over the unsafe, unhealthy living conditions, helicoptering windows or free fall windows, no locks on the first floor unit where you can actually climb into my window because the windows were set low. So there was a numerous, I won't go over everything, but there was a numerous things, leaking, mold. And when I went through those things with her, she told me that I can file the complaint. I did that with her. Immediately, within, I think, 2 weeks, she did contact the landlord and myself on the same communication. It went really fast, and I was impressed with how fast things got moving. We got LCI in there. We gave LCI 21 days, the Fair Rent Commission gave. Excuse my voice, I'm a little hoarse. But they came in and inspected the unit, went over the things that I had issues with. They did give the landlord, which was one of the large rental communities that they spoke of, the panel just spoke of earlier, the mega landlords. Maybe they're just having too much on their plate, but it's one of these large ones. I don't know if I can say the name, but maybe not. So after that, they gave them another 21 days to rectify. After it's still not being done. I think we did it like 3 times. Finally, we got it done. When we had a hearing, I would say about within 2 months. They reneged. They did not show up, so we had to reschedule. Wildelise said that's something common with this particular rental property owners. The final end of it, I did get those things resolved. My rent was, I stayed the same. To this day, I still have leaky sinks underneath, and there's still other issues. So my rent did stay the same for a certain time. I think it was going to be the same for a year or more. I don't have that with me right now to give you the date time. I also experienced the Fair Rent Commission as I am the president of our unit, the Quinnipiac Avenue Tenants Union. I'm the vice president where I live, and I supported other tenants that had also experience with the Fair Rent Commission. So I sat in hearings with individuals, and I saw how the Fair Rent Commission works and how quickly they come up with a resolve. There was one particular young lady who was being evicted without just cause. Someone mentioned just cause earlier today. And they said to her, well, you don't have a lease. And she goes, I have a lease. And they told her, well, show me your lease. She said, well, I lived here for 8 years. I can't find the original lease. They wanted her original lease. And they were evicting her because she couldn't show proof that she ever initially had permission to be in the unit. So they say, you are here illegally and you need to leave. And they were evicting her. So I sat on that hearing and helped her with that. And Will DeLeese and Fair Rent Commission of New Haven stopped that eviction. We did use the tenants union. We were able to furnish her with an attorney because we have our own attorneys at the Connecticut's tenants union. We have attorneys to support our residents. So we did have an attorney support her as well. And so the attorney also from the Connecticut Tenants Union, which I'm a part of, they helped her and represented her along with the Fair Rent Commission. So, and these things didn't take, am I over my minutes, my 5 minutes? I'm trying to keep track. These incidences with the Fair Rent Commission, they were quite, I would say, it wasn't a long process. They got on it right away. The day I called, July 17th, 2023, Will DeLeese got back to me right away. You know, I was a concerned resident. She didn't leave me waiting and wondering, oh my God, I'm not gonna sign this lease. And they were asking me, well, when are you leaving? And I'm like, well, you just told me this, I don't know. So I was a little nervous, but the Fair Rent Commission was really on point. They were expedient in their responding to my cause, and I'm really proud to be a part of it. So that's what I have for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hope, and I'm really glad that you shared about the expedited process. I'm glad that was your experience, and we're one thing we really appreciate about New Haven's Fair Rent Commission is their paid staff that are dedicated to this, and that allows them to respond quickly so that tenants are not left in the lurch for months waiting to hear back. Next, we'd like to hear from Alicia. Could you share the story? We heard a little bit earlier about East Lyme and the process. Could you share your story and your perspective as a tenant who was involved in the advocacy and then submitting your own complaint about what that's been like?
Sure. Again, thank you for having me today. Excuse me. As Beth in the last panel shared, I am from the East Lyme Fair Rent Commission, and I am a tenant of the Windward Village Apartments. Last June, our building was sold unbeknownst to our knowledge. And with the new property management coming in, they came in like a flood, and all of a sudden, our tenants whose leases were expiring within the next month, their rents were going to be increased up to 90%. Of course, it sent us into great panic mode. Everybody was trying to figure out, what are we going to do? How are we going to afford to live here? Where is there any more affordable housing to go to? And these are tenants that have been in our building for 20 plus years. So again, we were able to meet with Beth Sibilia and get a press conference going, and to really voice our concern about where we're going to go and how we can do something to make us stay comfortable in our living situation. hence where we were able to sign petitions and talk to the Board of Selectmen of East Lyme to get a fair rent commission going. With our situation, I feel like it was a very unique situation because it could take up to a year to get this commission established, but thankfully it was done within 2 months or so. And I'm very, very thankful because I am one of the tenants who classifies in the younger demographics of the building. I'm not protected with any tenants' rights as far as being 62 or older and or disabled. So I could very well be evicted because I'm not able to afford the rent, especially at a 90% increase. So from my perspective, I'm truly, truly grateful that the commission was established in such a great time, short amount of time, excuse me, and I'm able to also serve my community on this commission, to be able to literally tell landlords that, you know, it's hard out here to have affordable housing and to really justify the fair rent increases. So I'm thankful for that.
Thank you so much, Alicia. All right, next we're going to hear from John. John, as I mentioned earlier, is a landlord commissioner, and I've really appreciated, as we've prepared for this panel, the perspective that he brings to this conversation. I'd like to ask you, as you've sat in on the commissions and participated, what do you see as specific benefits to landlords from when a town creates a fair rent commission?
Hello, hello. Greetings, everyone. John Souza, longtime small landlord in the Hartford area. I also work around the state with several groups to advocate for education for small landlords and for fair laws up at the state capitol, just to be all so you understand where I come from. I do believe that landlords and tenants should get along. A small landlord is your best bet for housing. When you know somebody personally, you know, it's much harder to, you know, raise rents unjustly towards people. So I'm going to say off the front that the more you can encourage to keep the small landlords and not chase them out of the state, not sell out everything to these big corporations, the better off that the state will be in the long run for everybody's benefit. We're really the backbone of the state providing housing. It's the small 2 families, the 3 families, the 6 families, mom and pop run, that where a lot of people get their first chance. Maybe they don't have any credit or anything, and when you meet somebody face to face, you've got a better shot of getting an apartment versus just filling something out online and with, you know, you have no credit, no background. You know, it's very hard today. It's very hard. So I come to this perspective as a landlord, but I've been on both sides of the fair rent commissions. Previous to being on the board in West Hartford, on the commission in West Hartford, I was brought in several times in Hartford because I run property in Hartford, and it was for a $25 increase. But the person figured out that because the system is so backed up in Hartford that it would delay their increase for 4 to 6 months every year. So every year they would do it. So not so much that they, you know, they wanted that 25 times 6, you know, $150. It saved them money, but it really wasted the commission's time. Every time I just showed up and showed it was a pretty reasonable increase. And I think that's important to understand, that there's both sides. You know, there's people on both sides that do take advantage of the system. I'm not defending bad landlords. I think everybody should have to take good care of their property, and that's very important. I always advocate for that. So I did learn from the other side, from the commission side in West Hartford, that there's a lot of people that really don't like each other, and they're viciously angry towards each other when they come to these, and it's always not always about the money, about the increase. There's other reasons too, and Cynthia was here speaking earlier. They run a great program in West Hartford. It's quick. Everybody gets to vent their frustrations, and sometimes, I'll be honest with you, there's not a lot the board can do other than say, you know, okay, the rent is pretty reasonable, the increase, you can, you know, that's all we can do for you. We don't have the power to make things, you guys get along. And I think that's important to remember as commissions. We only have so much power, limited power, and we have to remember that. And, you know, I'm trying to keep people out of going to the housing court because it's expensive and nobody really wins when you go there when we have these meetings. And if you guys set up more of these, make sure it's fair to both sides, let people vent. That often solves the problem just by people venting, and then they can come out to some kind of agreement where they both work. But people don't get along, and we can't make them get along. Let's just put it like that in the long run. So hopefully everybody can benefit from the committees, and in the long run, everyone will be better off. So thank you.
Thank you so much, John. Next, we have Peter from Hamden, who I believe is the chair of the Hamden Fair Rent Commission. We've talked early in the day about how fair rent commissions are designed to be informal hearings, almost a jury of your peers, if you will, to determine if a rental increase meets the standards of harsh and unconscionable. Peter, could you just talk a little bit about your decision to become involved in the commission and maybe some of the strengths and the weaknesses that you see of this citizen-led model?
Sure. So a few years ago, like Sarah mentioned in her presentation, there was sort of a groundswell of tenant organizing and advocacy after the pandemic and during the pandemic. And part of that was reviving a FRC in Hamden that had been dormant for a number of years, as I understand it. And I wasn't personally involved in any of that advocacy myself, but I was acquainted with people who were. And I think I just saw a post on Facebook or something of somebody saying, hey, we're looking for people in Hamden who'd be willing to serve on this municipal commission. And I was curious, so I sat in on kind of an informal webinar that some of these advocates put together about what a commission was, what it could do, what serving on it would entail. And I decided to email the mayor and ask to be considered as a commissioner. So, and here I am. So that was, I think, around 2022, 2021, give or take. And that's pretty much that. And in terms of the sort of strengths, I also, just to go back again to what Sarah said before, I like what she said about it being kind of the conscience of the community, because we are lay people, we're not attorneys, we're not professional advocates or anything like that. Our powers are granted and circumscribed by the law, and we swear an oath to uphold the law and all that. But because we're not attorneys, we're not sort of bogged down by the minutia of the law, or is this strictly speaking legal? Yes, okay, fine. We are kind of inclined to look at what is fair, what is reasonable, what is the human impact of something that we see. And I guess the flip side of that would be, because we're not attorneys, we aren't as well versed in law, and there have definitely been times on the commission when being a lawyer would have been helpful. But thankfully we have staff attorneys from the town available, and other support staff from the town, some of whom are here, who are great, who help in that regard.
Thank you so much. And it really is, it's such a beautiful model when we're able to have well-staffed FRCs in the municipal level and engaged residents serving on the commission. It can really work together really well. Last, we have Sarah, who is an attorney and has often represented tenant clients before fair rent commissions during their hearings. However, we know that many tenants do not have the benefit of legal representation in these situations, which can be especially unbalanced when there's complaints, like in some of our tenants' examples, if there are larger landlord companies that maybe have in-house legal. So what tips would you give to anyone submitting a Fair Rent Commission complaint who doesn't have legal representation? And what tips would you give to Fair Rent Commissions on how to make the process better for those who may not be as well versed in the legality of housing laws in this state?
Good? Okay. So first of all, I'm really happy to be here today, and I just want to say that I'm a free lawyer, and that's why most people don't get to me, right? The people who do fair rent on the tenant side mostly are free lawyers. There's some legal aid colleagues of mine, and I work for the Center for Children's Advocacy. So we like to encourage people to make it a non-lawyer situation. It's great if you can go in without a lawyer because it's going to be more accessible. But I think we have to realize that not everyone was born to speak to a large group, right? Like I grew up arguing at the dinner table. My dad used to sit down and say, "Not tonight, Sarah," right? And so it wasn't hard for me to get up and say, these conditions are crappy and they are not okay. But sometimes it's really scary for people to get up and they don't go to open meetings and they don't really know what the process is about. So I just want to say very quickly, for tenants who are thinking of doing this, I tell them exactly what I tell my law students, which is, get your evidence together. So many people have the evidence, right? They have the evidence of their crappy conditions and they screenshot. They have when they've asked their landlord to fix something that hasn't been fixed. They have inspectors, because this is Connecticut. Everywhere you are, you have an inspector who should and will come out, hopefully, and see the unit. And so you should get your exhibits together. One thing I always do for a fair rent is I do a timeline, because I want you to see that it's not just 3 months this has gone on, but 3 years, right? And I do a timeline and I do a graph. So when you're getting an increase, you want to show that 200 increase. You want to show what is that percentage. And the other thing I do is I go back in time. Did you get a 200 every single year? And sometimes I even project out at the rate we're going, look where we're going to be. And even if you're not great in math, you can find out what the percentage is. I feel like some of the very basics that you could come into your hearing with are very helpful. The other thing I'll say is so many of these hearings are virtual, and one thing that happens a lot with my clients is they say, "I don't want to show the apartment." And I say, "Why don't you show the crappy hole that's right in the wall, right? Why don't you sit right there for your hearing and let them see what you're living with?" I've gone into houses where rats have run across my foot in broad daylight. Show me the rats. I have a client who has a cup of coffee. She put it down, 10 roaches in it within a minute. The ice is still there. Show that to the commissioners. They want to see. So that's that. The other thing I want to say, to what I always say to any law student or anyone, you're going to go to a meeting, you're going to go to something like this, get informed. These are open meetings. So you have a chance to see Hamden, to see New Haven, to see wherever you are on it's an open meeting. So you can even just click on. Now I will say towns, it's sometimes hard to find your meetings. And as someone who has served on different town boards, it's sometimes hard to figure out where the connection is, where you click on. But that's something that I urge people to do, because if you've never seen the New Haven Fair Rent public hearing, you might not know what you're gonna get. So now I just wanna say very quickly, fair rent commissions, what can you do? Here's what I think you can do. You can have your rules posted. Every fair rent commission does something different, okay? Every fair rent commission, but they don't tell you exactly the way it's gonna go. If you could write in a letter, you've got 5 minutes to do this, you've got 2 minutes to do that. Very helpful. Ask for exhibits, and fair rent commissioners, please read the exhibits. And I'm running out of time, so the last thing I'll say is, fair rent commissions, learn your powers. Peter and I've been in front of Peter, and I understand that sometimes you're not a lawyer, and so you say, "I'm not a lawyer and I don't know the law." But what I would say is, this is your power. Learn what you can do. One of the frustrating things is when I'm in front of people and a fair rent commission and they say, "I'm not sure if we can or can't do this." Look at what the cases are in front of you and find out what you are and are not allowed to do. And as a free attorney, I am happy to answer any questions of any commissioner at any time. You don't have to listen to me, but I'm happy to give you what the law is. I've got a lot more, but I'm out of time.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much for your perspectives. I think we're going to take one question for the whole panel and then open up to the audience. And I'd like you to think about your perspective either as a tenant or a landlord who has participated in a hearing, or from the commissioner perspective who sees lots of hearings. What's something, a process, a resource, a strategy, an approach that you have found helpful for a successful fair rent commission? Because we've got a lot of models out there.
I mentioned before our staff, so I think having dedicated staff available to receive complaints, to mediate between different parties, to put together information and everything for the commissioners, so everything's ready to go at the time of the actual hearing, has been indispensable. So Loris Grant is our our clerk, so thanks to her, and Karen Bivens I think was here as well. So Hampton's got a really good support staff on hand, which has just been huge. And so any town that can spare any resources at all to have people behind the scenes making it work, it really can't be overstated, the importance of that in my experience.
Thank you.
I just agree with that so much, and that I think when I've seen things work out is when there's a fact checker, so that's often that staff, right? Because I've sat in on at the end when they're deciding your case, you sit there, but you're not allowed to talk. And for me, it's like, if there is a hell, that's what it is. You sit there and listen to them get some facts wrong, and they'll say things like, well, there's only been conditions for 2 months. And I'm like, for 3 years, but I can't say that, I'm not allowed to. So those of you who have staff, you will sometimes jump in very respectfully and say, I refer you to the inspector's report, and it's been X, Y, and Z. That works really well. The other thing is just basic fairness. So I think it is basic fairness to give continuances if you need it, but how many times have I seen a tenant show up and a landlord's attorney who comes at the last second and they get a continuance? Now, some of you give a continuance as of right, and I get that, but even in court, if you're gonna have one continuance as of right, you have to respect. And so if you give it the day of, that's not very helpful, right? And so if commissions can just think about basic fairness in terms of not letting people interrupt, not letting people cross if they're not crossing, if that's not what they do, but also just in terms of if someone has showed up, like how many informal hearings have we had where the other side doesn't show up? I say you had your chance and it's over. I think it works well when there are rules and where a person feels like they're going to be heard and those rules are going to be followed.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Okay. I would like to speak to that. Excuse me for the coughing. My allergies are really bothering me today, so I apologize. I think I spoke earlier to this point when I talked about how New Haven Fair Rent Commission, the expedient and how fast the process and even the communication, the back and forth, informing me of what was to take place, what to expect, and even having the panel there supporting in the informal hearing, it made me more relaxed. I had never participated in an informal hearing with any Fair Rent Commission. So I think for me, I would say the process and that they used and the expedient moving forward, so you're not worried and lingering on about what's going to happen and being nervous as a tenant, being concerned about what's going to happen with your family. So the way they move things along, for me, I felt that was one of the great things about it.
Thank you.
I agree with everyone that has spoke so far, but I think another process or resource to have that we help to make an FRC successful is the communication, especially in between hearings. A lot of tenants may not be aware that as a commission, we can only meet in the public. So that means we meet in the public, and that gives you the opportunity as a tenant to come and ask the questions that you have as far as future hearings or past hearings or any question you have as far as submitting a complaint. But I think to have a successful FRC is just making sure you stay in touch with each other in between hearings, the communication part.
Thank you. And I will briefly interject here and then open the floor to you. We've done an informal look at whether commissions have hearings scheduled for bi-monthly or monthly, whether they meet as needed or when a complaint comes up. And it's very, very clear in the data that the more hearings are proactively scheduled, the more hearings that actually happen. If you have to cancel them, you do, but it's one thing for a tenant to get on their website and see every first Wednesday there's a chance versus nothing, or their complaint goes into the void. So that's one interjection there. And John, I'd love to hear your perspective as well.
Sure. Can you hear me? How's that? There you go. So the thing I found very interesting about West Hartford is they have, I'll call them an ombudsman, but someone that contacts both the landlord and the tenant, explains the process to them, basically holds the hand for both sides. A lot of people are petrified to go in front of a hearing, you know what I mean? And they're even there making sure beforehand they talk to them, bring this with you, bring that with you, for both sides, because there's small landlords that are in the same boat, right? And they actually were there at the hearing explaining what's going on. You have to wait your turn. You know, to both sides, they had no bias towards one or the other. I think that helps keep it a little bit more informal, which I think is important, because I don't think you guys want to create something that's big and expensive where everybody has to have a lawyer, or the town has to have a stenographer, and there's going to be a court, almost like a court procedure, and that's just going to cost money, and nobody wins in the long run for that. So West Hartford, in my experience, has done a good job at that part, and I think that's very valuable. It's worth the time. You may have to spend a little bit of time with the staff, but I think it'll save a lot of energy for everybody and makes it more access for everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John. And you've expressed to me in the past that, you can have written instructions all you want, but a person really makes a big difference versus just handing someone a checklist. So I think we have time for 2 questions from the audience.
Hi. Oops. I'm curious how you were recruited to serve and if you have advice on how to recruit tenants and landlords to serve.
I'll speak on that. I was recruited due to just my involvement with everything that was going on with my building, as far as just getting a fair rent commission going. A lot of my tenants literally pushed me and was like, oh, come on, Alicia, please represent us. I think it'd be great on the board. So that's how I became involved with my fair rent commission. And what was the second part of your question? I'm sorry. My advice would be just literally giving out information that you can, whatever you can, as far as about the fair rent commission, putting that out there, because as someone mentioned before, it's not the greatest public knowledge. So I think as long as we really get this out there, that there is a fair rent commission, that tenants can go and get their story heard to get their rent decrease, getting that out there. And as far as trying to recruit people, again, just being communicative, and just really advocating for someone to be involved with the community, things such as this.
For me, my involvement, I became involved. I was first involved with the Connecticut's Tenants Union, and from that, I did speak at a hearing at City Hall at an alderman's meeting, and I spoke there, sharing my experience with a really bad situation in one of the units where I live, not where I currently live, but a former apartment where I was. And I shared with the aldermen, the Board of Aldermen, what I went through, and in relation to LCI and their involvement with that situation. And when speaking there, I received a phone call from Madam Director Wildelise Bermudez. She heard me speak, and she wanted to know that if I would be interested in being a part of the Fair Rent Commission, and that's how I became involved. And since then, I've became the vice president of the Connecticut's Tenants Union, helping in the community. And the second part of the question asked how to get involved, or how would you recommend getting involved? I believe that was what it was. I would say call your Fair Rent Commission to see, how you can become more involved as a resident, as a tenant. I also would say to, if you don't have a fair rent commission in your town, I would get together with other people who are willing to get something started, and there's strength in numbers. And I think every town should have a fair rent commission. It's amazing that in this day and age that's not the case. So if you don't, I would say, push for it. Get people like minds and get it together. And if you need help, contact other fair rent commissions to help you get it going in your town, in your city. I yield my mic.
Questions?
Hi, I didn't have a question. It was more of a comment. Hi, everybody. I'm Simone. I'm representing Community Action Agency of New Haven. I do want to say the Fair Rent Commission has been extremely responsive, and I do agree with Hope. I've had the experience with them myself. I've lived with my landlord for like 5 years, and until I met Fair Rent Commission and I've made my complaints, within less than 2 weeks, the issues were fixed in my apartment. So I do want to give a shout out to Walla Lee's and her team, Colleen and Lee. You guys are really amazing, and the work that you do is really amazing.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. One last big round of applause to our panelists. And I would now like to invite Amy Peltier and Will Delise Bermudez to the front for our closing.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to try to be really quick here. I know we stand between some of you and lunch. I'm Amy Peltier. I am the Coalition and Advocacy Director here at the partnership. What an incredible day. This has been a really great learning opportunity to learn more about fair rent commissions and also the people and towns that are getting them up and running. I'm here with Will Delise Bermudez, Director of the New Haven Fair Rent Commission, and we're here to share an announcement about an exciting new partnership, some of which you've already heard about the network this morning. And thanks to a 2-year grant from our Connecticut Department of Housing, we're proud to announce today is the official public launch of the statewide Fair Rent Commission network. Thank you to Connor's in the back. Thank you, Connor, from the department, who's here today and is going to be helping to support this work. The partnership will be collaborating with the network to support and advance the capacity of the Fair Rent Commissions across the state. This afternoon, the Fair Rent Commissions that are already network members will be having their first formal meeting as part of this new collaboration. I'm not going to read everyone's name just because we're short on time, but the network will be led by an executive board of leaders representing diverse towns across the state, bringing an array of skills and expertise. Will Delise will serve as the chair of the network's executive board. I cannot think of anyone more well-suited for this position, and I'm going to hand this off to her to share some more specific details about the partnership.
Thank you all. So this is definitely a really exciting moment because we have not had an opportunity for various fair rent commissions who are already doing the work to come together in this way. And this all started last year. It actually started here in New Haven when we kept saying, and also Rafi and Sarah and others, so many of us were saying, wouldn't it be interesting if we had some way to meet? And here we are today, exactly 1 year later to the day. So we're really excited about this amazing partnership, our collaboration through the Partnership for Strong Communities, who will be our fiduciary, and as well as thanks to the Connecticut Department of Housing, who've allowed us this opportunity to be able to do this type of work. So what does the work consist of? What does it look like? What are we doing? We are meeting monthly. In these meetings, it allows Fair Rent Commissions to receive updates, important updates on what's happening throughout the state of Connecticut, whether that also relate to certain laws that have changed, and how that impacts the work that we're doing on the ground as Fair Rent Commissions. We also have now the opportunity through the Department of Housing sponsorship to receive trainings. This is something that many Fair Rent Commissions across the state of Connecticut have asked for time and time again. Now, while we're very appreciative that the state of Connecticut back in 2023 expanded the Fair Rent Commissions so that now more municipalities have access to them, we also realize that while we're doing this work, we need a way to be trained. And so what better way to do it than by coming through the network and receiving these trainings, for example, mediation trainings, public hearing trainings, etc. We also look forward to the network as being an informational repository. For those who are already network members, we're going to hear from the Connecticut Data Collaborative, who we are now partnering with, who will be collecting data. And so our hope, our goal is to be able to come together, to learn from one another, to be able to share resources with one another in such a way that we can then tell a story to the entire state of Connecticut and to the state legislators. We are blessed today by having Senator Martha Marks, who is here. We're going to hear from her. The network members will hear from her a little later this afternoon. And so we have the momentum with us. We have you all in this room, and we're really excited for the upcoming work that we're going to be doing. This is a photo of one of our network events that we had, one of our meetings. We were so lucky to have this meeting hosted in Hamden. So thank you so much to the Hamden Fair Rent Commission team and Karen and Larice who put this amazing event together for us. And for more information about the statewide Fair Rent Commissions network, you can certainly connect with us by email at the statewide FRC network@gmail.com, and we will have more information to come. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Wildelise, and thank you to everyone who made today possible. A big shout out to Alicia Gardner from the partnership staff, who really led all of this work in bringing us together. Thank you to our presenters and panelists for sharing their experiences, and a special thank you to all of you for coming and sharing your morning with us and wanting to learn more about the Fair Rent Commissions. You as attendees here today are really an important piece of this work, and we want to hear from you. Oops, I'm supposed to do that. You can't leave until you share your thoughts with us and answer just a couple quick questions about Fair Rent Commissions. So this is a QR code linked to a survey. I see some of you pulling out your phones. Pull out your phones, people. Focus your phone, your camera app on the QR code, and it'll connect to a link, and just ask a couple of questions. But today was not just about sharing information, it was really an invitation. So your responses will be critical in helping to shape the future work of the network and letting us know where and how we can support you and potentially a Fair Rent Commission or already a Fair Rent Commission in your community. If you can't scan, there are QR codes in the lobby and in the hallways there that you can use when you leave. And yes, we will be emailing out slides and links to a lot of the documents that you see in the hallway today. While you're answering that survey, I'd like to make a quick announcement. Please save the date for our annual Connecticut Affordable Housing Conference coming up this November, the 17th and 18th. We will host dozens of free and virtual sessions covering all aspects of affordable housing and efforts being made by leaders doing this work across the state and beyond. We'd love to have you register and to participate. If you feel really ambitious and want to submit a proposal to present at the conference, our request for proposals is open until tomorrow. Get to work. Finally, please stay connected with us at the Partnership for Strong Communities. We cannot do the work that we do without being engaged with the diverse communities of housing need across the state. Here's a final QR code, and you can use this to sign up for our mailing list. It will keep you informed of all of our events. We have other IForums just like this. We have virtual intersectional webinars that cover different issues that intersect with housing, and it'll allow you to follow and be a part of taking action on housing efforts we're leading and that we're supporting with our collaborating partners during the legislative session. So this concludes our event today. Network members, please stay for your afternoon session. Everyone else, thank you so much for coming, sharing your morning with us. Fill out your survey, and we hope to see you again. Thank you.